This video is brought to you by AMD. Welcome back everybody to another episode of Direct Comparison. In today's episode, we're looking at the upcoming Resident Evil 3 Remake, and seeing how it compares both visually and from a gameplay perspective to its 1999 source material. Now before we get started, we're obviously going to see improvements visually in just about every aspect, but the goal of this video is to highlight just exactly what Capcom has managed to accomplish with this remake, and how the new visuals bring new life to Raccoon City. But much like the Resident Evil 2 remake that released last year, Resident Evil 3 Remake isn't just a graphical overhaul. It features drastically different gameplay mechanics, along with some pretty major changes to the level structure. But before we get into all that, let's first briefly go over all of the visual enhancements that you can expect when the game releases on Friday. So, to kick this comparison off, let's begin by looking at some of our character models, starting with Resident Evil 3's lead protagonist, Jill Valentine. Now, as you can probably already imagine, the new character model features far more complex geometry, shaders, and overall detail, making her appear like a genuinely real person. Her design still looks pretty similar to the classic character, though there are a few big changes that have been made to her outfit. Rather than sporting a tube top and skirt, Jill now is wearing a blue tank top and jeans, probably a more comfortable outfit when running around zombie-infested streets at night. And then we have the Nemesis, the game's lead antagonist, who looks even more ferocious and intimidating than before. For those of you unfamiliar, Resident Evil 3's biggest feature is this towering creature that can't be killed, and will relentlessly pursue the player through the alleyways and streets. Because of this fundamental role in the gameplay, Capcom spent extra time ensuring they nailed down every last detail here, and it really shows. The first thing I noticed was that the proportions and scaling of features along his face have been adjusted, with his jaw being lowered slightly, giving him a more menacing look. The strange purple veins, or tubes, in and around him have also been hidden with Nemesis's new clothing, that, instead of being a custom-made leather jacket, now appears to be a biohazard containment bag that he's broken out of. Throughout the course of the game, Nemesis will continue to devolve and change like he did in the original, but for the sake of avoiding spoilers, I'll leave that for you guys to discover. Carlos's character has also seen an interesting redesign. The first thing that stands out right away is his new hairdo, that's more unkempt and much longer. He also has more stubble on his face and is sporting a t-shirt rather than going sleeveless. And then of course we have our zombies, that seem to be mostly made up of models used in the Resident Evil 2 remake. In the original game, zombies featured some nice detail like blood and tears along their clothing, and there were even some brand new models like this heavyweight zombie inside the police station. The remake seems to make similar improvements, with a handful of new zombie models being mixed in to help boost the variety. And just like last year's game, the animations are vastly improved, with zombies stumbling around corners and flailing around as you try to land precision headshots on them. It's also difficult to judge whether a zombie you've downed has been put down for good. In the original, zombies could be pronounced dead if they made a certain animation, or if blood started to pool around their corpse. In the new game, the animations make it difficult to judge, and if there are blood pools, they're almost impossible to see in the dark atmosphere of the remake. Next, we have our environments. The environments have seen a massive overhaul, even more so than the environments in last year's remake. Raccoon City is almost unrecognizable, save for a few iconic landmarks like the warehouse and the RPD. In the original game, these environments were created using static, pre-rendered images that, while not technically impressive, still offer some beautiful detail and gave the game its own distinct look and personality. In the remake, these locations are brought to life in a fully 3D rendered world, and the full range of movement and camera control help to provide an even closer look at these areas. It really feels like you're trapped in the city now, and exploring every inch of its streets is not only immersive, but also necessary to find supplies. As for the changes to the level layout, I'll talk about that more in a bit. The lighting is of course another area where the remake makes some fantastic improvements. Lighting in the original game was pre-baked and simplistic, making the environments appear overly bright with no real-time shadow effects. For the time, they looked great, and there's some nice shading in these images to create a sense that you're standing under fluorescent lights late at night in an abandoned city. But the remake is on an entirely different level, with real-time lighting effects that properly cast shadows from objects and character models, and help to create an entirely new feel to the experience. Volumetric lighting helps to make silhouetting zombies even more horrifying as they stumble out of the shadow and towards the player. And some areas are now pitch black, requiring players to navigate them carefully with a small flashlight, only further adding to the horror-oriented tone of the experience. And then we have effects. While effects like fire and water all look significantly better in the remake, I have to give the original credit for what it was able to accomplish back then. The fire effects still look fantastic, and coupled with the beautifully rendered backdrop images, it genuinely looks like the fire is lighting up the environment. The fire in the remake, of course, is even more impressive, and the added benefit of the wet street surfaces and zombie gore effects only further add to the immersion. And now, we have our gameplay comparisons, and just like with the RE2 comparison last year, this is where things get to be very interesting. Earlier this week, I played through both the original Resident Evil 3 and the remake, and they're drastically different from each other in terms of how they play. Of course, the biggest change here is the movement and camera design. The Resident Evil 3 remake features a modern over-the-shoulder viewpoint, allowing players to freely control their camera and directly aim their weapon at enemies. In the original, the cameras are fixed at specific angles, only changing when the player runs off the screen at specific points. This design made controlling Jill and Carlos much more difficult, and made it easier for the developer to put in surprise moments like unexpected hordes of zombies around the corner. This camera system also plays a major role in how the Nemesis functions, and allows him to spawn in off-screen to trick the player into thinking he's constantly chasing them through doors. In the remake, the player is given far more control over the camera, and locations are all seamlessly connected now, with no loading screens of any kind. This impacts how the Nemesis behaves. He still feels like he's spawning in at certain points, but they're more surprising now. He'll burst through walls or even superhero drop in front of the player, and will chase them at incredible speed. The same tactics from before still work here, so trying to fight him with explosives will earn you valuable loot, while dodging him and running away will likely save you from a premature death. But his constant presence and faster movement speed makes him even more intimidating than before. It's a very similar experience. Most of the game will have players running away from this unstoppable monster while also dodging zombies and trying to secure an escape route out of the city. But the layout of the city isn't quite the same as it was in 99. It's much simpler overall. There aren't as many interconnecting alleyways to memorize, and the paths are a bit wider, allowing for greater maneuverability when dealing with enemies. Some parts of the game have been removed or replaced entirely. The first half of the game, for example, is spent on the streets, with new shops to explore and even a large construction site. But the RPD isn't accessible until much later, and there's quite a few surprises inside that might catch longtime fans off guard. The later half of the game is even more interesting though, as it no longer features the iconic clock tower interior, the park, or the water treatment plant. Elements of these areas are now incorporated into new extended sequences, like a large sewer network, a much more expansive hospital, and a massive underground umbrella lab. Another interesting change has been made to the game's enemies. Most of the classics return, like zombies, dogs, hunters, and of course the Nemesis, and they all behave pretty much the same as you remember. However, the insectoid brain suckers are now limited to a substation area, rather than spawning all throughout the city. Additionally, the rare gamma hunters located in the basement lab of the hospital have been removed, and are instead combined with the Gravedigger boss from the park to form a brand new enemy type. And just like with Resident Evil 2 Remake, the giant spiders and crows are nowhere to be seen. The general gameplay mechanics have also seen a few tweaks. Gunpowder, for example, no longer requires the player to use a reloading tool to craft ammunition. Gunpowder simply needs to be combined to make ammunition, saving on time spent juggling items in the storage container. The ink ribbons have similarly been removed, allowing players to save as often as they want at typewriters, even on the hardcore difficulty setting. Resident Evil 3's dodge maneuver has also returned, but is expanded slightly, allowing players to aim in slow motion at the attacking enemy's head for a quick critical hit. RE3 Remake also removes the choice system implemented in the original game. In the classic, certain scenarios would trigger a slow motion scene where the player could choose between two options, which would branch off both the gameplay and story drastically, and even impact how the game ended. In the remake, there's no choice system at all. The only ending is the canonical ending, and players are not given a choice in how they approach encounters with enemies like the Nemesis. Overall, the gameplay experience may seem similar on the surface, but the changes made make the Resident Evil 3 Remake play much faster and more aggressively than its source material. There's more scripted action set pieces and quick-time events spread throughout, and moments of tense silence are replaced with hordes of undead and lots of action. Finally, let's wrap up with a brief sound comparison. Which game do you think has the better overall sound design? And that wraps up this episode of Direct Comparison. Overall, the Resident Evil 3 Remake changes a surprising amount from the original game. The visuals are obviously a huge improvement, and the redesigns to characters like Jill and Nemesis look much more modern and realistic. But the major changes made to the layout and structure of the game design ultimately result in a shorter, slightly easier experience. My final time for the original game was a little under 7 hours, while the remake was only 5.5 hours. That being said, the inclusion of a new modifier unlock system that allows you to purchase upgrades using credits earned in-game does make repeat playthroughs more enticing in the remake. The original game had some replay potential, like the unlockable Mercenaries mode that turned the city into a challenging time trial of sorts, but there was nothing to really entice players into replaying the main story outside of trying out the different choices at specific points. RE3 Remake also comes bundled with a new asymmetrical multiplayer experience called Resistance that pits 4 player-controlled survivors against a player mastermind that can spawn in zombies and other obstacles, though its multiplayer-centric design will likely not be for everyone. Overall, Resident Evil 3 Remake is a surprisingly different experience from its 1999 counterpart. There are several callbacks to the classic game's design, but there are definitely some major changes that fans may be torn on. The removal of the clock tower and park area, for example, may be disappointing, though the greatly expanded hospital sequence and the new underground lab area do help to make up for this slightly. The Nemesis's behavior has been altered to make him even more intimidating, and the improved controls lend themselves to a much faster-paced action experience that helps transition this title smoothly into the more action-focused design of Resident Evil 4. But what do you guys think? Do you think it improves on the original, or do you still prefer the design of the 1999 classic? Let me know in the comments section. Now, if you're looking to play Resident Evil 3 on the PC and are planning on upgrading your rig soon, be sure to check out AMD's Raise the Game offer, where you can get both Resident Evil 3 and Monster Hunter World Iceborne, along with 3 months of Xbox Game Pass, allowing you to play the recently released PC version of Halo: The Master Chief Collection. This offer is available with select purchases of AMD Radeon RX 5000 series GPUs, including the 5700 XT that was used to record the footage for this video. If you want more details on this offer, be sure to check the link in the description. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos posted every week.